Welcome to another episode of UMass Sports Weekly. Now joining me at the desk to discuss some UMass basketball, Mark the Shark Daly and Marc Jean Louis. We like to call this combo Marky Mark. See what I did there? I didn't do that. They made it up. Anyways, guys, still unranked. We're not at the positivity we were at to start the season, but some good stuff, some good games we've seen, some good play from UMass in this past week. As I said, still unranked. Mark the Shark, I'm going to start with you. Why don't you give us a little recap of the URI game?
Well, we pulled off a 73-68 win down in Rhode Island. It was a very tough game, and definitely a lot tougher, I think, than they thought it was going to be. They go into the Ryan Center down in Kingston, Rhode Island. It was a very back-and-forth game between the two teams. URI only had 8 players playing in the game, so it was kind of they only win by 5, and really it was close until the final minute of the game. That's kind of a little disappointing that they, given the fact that they only had 8 players playing for the Rams, definitely they could have played a little better. But a win is a win, and I think you can't go wrong with that.
Now, Mark, I'm going to call you Mark for this segment. Now, it was a win. We saw some great plays from UMass, putting in big blocks, some great stuff from the team. But as Mark said, you know, you'd like to see this be a little easier for UMass going up against a team like URI. So would you call this a good win for the Minutemen, or do you think this is still, maybe we should have seen a little better effort out of them?
I mean, given that URI is absolutely one of the worst teams right now in the Atlantic 10, the fact that UMass only won this game by 5, it's actually raising some questions right now. I mean, UMass is still a team that's absolutely destined to make the NCAA tournament, and if you're only beating a team that's among the worst in your conference by 5 points, I mean, what's that saying to the voters of the AP poll? Again, UMass came in this weekend, not a single vote in the AP poll, and I can understand why. I mean, they were at one point down by 7 points, again, to the worst team in the Atlantic 10. And, you know, if you want to be in the tournament with the best, I mean, you're going to have to play a lot better than that, especially against a team like Rhode Island, who you're expected to beat by a much larger margin than 5
Mark,
points.
good win or bad one?
Definitely. A win is a win, as I said earlier, but not.
But I'm making you pick.
But it was not a good win.
Okay.
I mean, you look at they did have a couple things that were positive for the team. You look at they did have 19 fast break points compared to Rhode Island's only 4 fast break points. Derek Gordon, 3rd straight game with double-digit points. But the biggest thing that I was concerned about watching the game and going over some of the stats was the fact that they had 19 turnovers, and that's just something. When you play, that's a number that they should have lost to. That's something that should have caused them to lose. And if they were playing any decent team, that margin of error, having 19 turnovers, definitely would have cost them a game if it was against a team that was in the top half of the Atlantic 10. If it's going to be a team that they're playing come tournament time, if they're going to play in March Madness, they cannot have 19 turnovers and expect to come away with a win. So very lucky, not a good win for this team.
Yeah, very tough to win with high turnover numbers like that. And it's terrible to see high turnover numbers like that, especially like it's against a team like URI, who's not very good, and we were at once considered one of the best teams in the country. So I agree, bad win, but there's still some time for UMass to show some stuff tomorrow night. At the Mullen Center, 7 o'clock, the Minutemen will be taking on George Mason University. Good matchup there. Another A10 matchup. Chance for the Minutemen to help that A10 record. Mark, what do you think UMass has to do to bounce back from a pretty bad loss, as we're discussing, against URI to come out against George Mason at home?
I mean, against a team like George Mason, again, UMass will be returning home to the Mullen Center to take on George Mason Wednesday. And absolutely, George Mason right now, they're having a horrible time in their first season in the Atlantic 10, 1-9. In their first 10 games as an Atlantic 10 school. Their only win coming against Duquesne University, which also, like URI, is a god-awful team in the Atlantic 10. If I can say so myself. URI, they are absolutely horribly statistically in the offensive category. The only 2 players that I would say UMass needs to watch out for is Byron Allen and Sherrod Wright, their guards. If they can keep them under 13 points a game, absolutely no problem. UMass should win this one fine.
Mark, what do you hope to see from this team tomorrow night at the Mullins?
Well, I mean, when we played them a couple weeks ago down at George Mason, they pulled off a 88-87 win thanks to a Derek Gordon layup with 8 seconds to go. But they're really going to have, based on what they played, the way they played against them last time, they in points in the paint, it was pretty much equal. UMass won that game 54-48 for points in the paint. But you really, as Mark said here, you got to really control those the guards. In the previous game when they played George Mason, Sherrod Wright had 26 points and Brian Allen had 21 points. So it's going to be a really game where you have to control those guards. I mean, that's more than half the points that they scored were just from those two guards. And then one of the other things that we've seen a big problem this whole season that's going to play a big factor. When we played George Mason a couple weeks ago, the amount of second chance points that George Mason scored in comparison to us, they doubled the amount of second chance points compared to what UMass had. So that's something, and that really just comes down to rebounding the ball and being able to get those offensive rebounds. And that's something that UMass has always struggled with. It seems so this year with just not having enough big men out there. I mean, they play the guard game. They have Trey. They have Derek Gordon. You have Chaz Williams. But those are small guys. You're going to need Caddy to step up and get a bunch of rebounds. Putney's going to have to step up. And Maxi Esho coming off. He's still recovering. He did play, had 7 points in 27 minutes against URI, but he was coming off a concussion. He's really going to have to step up and be a presence in the paint for this team if they want to pull off a win against a team that is really 1-8 in A10, 8-15 overall, a team that, just like URI, that should not be a close game, but when they played them last time, it was. So they definitely are going to have some of their big guys step up and be a presence in the paint if they want to pull off a win tomorrow night.
Minutemen hoping to go 10-0 at the Mullins Center. Be sure to go check that out tomorrow night. We will have coverage of it on next week's episode. I'm sure you'll be seeing that. Also, UMass taking on George Washington on Saturday. George Washington, again, very middle-of-the-road A10 team, but has played some very competitive games this year against some tough teams. So another tough matchup there for the Minutemen. Mark, down on the left, what do you think UMass has to do against this George Washington team on Saturday?
Against George Washington, George Washington and UMass, they are very similar in terms of the standings in the Atlantic 10. I mean, just looking at their lineup, they have this is going from top to bottom. They have a pretty stout lineup in Keaton Savage at guard, Joe McDonald also with Isaiah Armwood, Patricio Garino, and of course Kevin Larson. I mean, this game's going to be at George Washington. It's a place where UMass struggles heavily, so UMass is really going to have to try to put all those road woes aside and they really need this win in order to strengthen their resume as far as the tournament goes. And statistically, UMass, they struggle down in GW, but if you look back at last year's matchup it was a win against GW. So if they can find what worked for them in that last game against GW, if they can hold down their three forwards, Patricio Garino, Kevin Larson, Isaiah Armwood, and if Chaz Williams and Maxi Esho and other players, Raphael Putney, if they play their game, then I think they'll be okay.
Another exciting week for UMass basketball. We should be sure to check it out. We'll have coverage of those games, and let's hope they can keep this winning pace going that they kind of fell off of a little bit. Guys, thanks for joining me. Stay tuned. We'll be right back to talk some UMass hockey.